Welcome to City Vision University's podcast, providing book summaries of books on rescue missions, city missions, and the Salvation Army.
Glad to be here for this one. It is a fascinating topic.
Yeah, it really is. Because, what happens when a charity realizes that relying on faith alone it isn't enough to keep the doors open anymore.
Right. It's a huge turning point.
It is. So I want you to picture the scene. It's November 13th, 1984.
Oh, the 80s.
Yeah, right in the thick of it. We're talking the height of the cassette tape era, big shoulder pads, totally shifting political landscapes.
Absolutely.
And inside this boardroom, there's this ministry consultant named Lloyd Olson. And he basically drops this massive, heavily bound diagnostic report right onto the table.
Just a total thud on the desk.
Exactly. And sitting around that table is the Board of Trustees for the International Union of Gospel Missions, the IUGM.
Which is a huge organization.
Massive.
Yeah.
And Olson, he's been busy. He didn't just, sit in an ivory tower office to write this thing.
Right. He was on the ground.
He spent months visiting 20 different rescue missions across 17 different cities.
That is a brutal travel schedule for 1984.
Oh, totally. No smartphones, no internet, just walking the floors of the Bowery Mission in New York, the Pacific Garden Mission in Chicago, the Union Rescue Mission out in L.A.
He was really in the trenches.
He was. He interviewed over 40 key leaders who were operating right there in urban poverty. And when he handed that board, it wasn't a polite pat on the back. It was, frankly, a severe reality check.
Okay, let's unpack this.
It's just a remarkable document to unpack, honestly, because it captures this highly specific, almost like a collision.
A collision.
Yeah, we're looking at a true time capsule from the exact moment in the 1980s when faith-based charities looked around and finally realized that legacy and, just having good intentions,
Right.
they simply weren't going to sustain them anymore.
Because the world was changing so fast.
Exactly. They were facing modern urbanization on a scale they had literally never seen before. The demographics were shifting so aggressively right under their feet.
And to survive this totally new era, they realized they needed hard demographic data, they needed aggressive public relations, and frankly, they needed corporate-level management strategies.
Which is a huge pivot for a ministry.
A massive pivot. This report is basically the blueprint of a grassroots, spiritually driven movement attempting to professionalize itself, but without losing its soul in the process.
Which is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. We're going to explore that really painful but necessary transition.
It was definitely painful for a lot of them.
For sure. So let's start right where the report starts, which is this massive wake-up call about the sheer size of the world.
Section 1, right?
Yeah, Section 1. It's titled Broader Vision, and it leans so heavily into the demographic explosion of urbanization. Back in 1984, Olson points out to the board that there were 34 metropolitan areas in the world with populations over 5 million people.
Which already sounds like a lot.
It does. But the prediction he drops on them is just staggering. He says by the year 2025, there will be at least 93 of these megacities. Yeah. He is forcing them to look at the math.
And the math was terrifying for an organization that was basically still built on a 19th century model.
Right. Like totally outdated.
Exactly. But Olson, he's smart. He doesn't just present the numbers and say, scale up your soup kitchens.
Right. He frames it differently.
He places this statistical explosion squarely within a spiritual and psychological framework that this specific board would understand.
Knowing his audience.
Yes. He leads with Proverbs 29.18, where there is no vision, the people perish.
Oh, classic verse for this kind of thing.
Totally. And he quotes a missiologist named Dr. Dubose, who argues that future historians will actually record the 20th century as the century where the whole world became one immense city.
One immense city. That's a heavy thought.
It is. And then he brings in another guy, Roger S. Greenway, stating that he who wins the city wins the world. So the underlying message here is that the operating environment has just fundamentally altered.
Yeah, the ground shifted.
If you operate a mission designed for a 1920s city, you are going to be absolutely crushed by a 1980s metropolis, let alone a 2025 megacity.
And he doesn't just, give them population stats. He actually kind of psychoanalyzes the leadership, right?
Oh, he definitely does.
Because there's this incredibly specific, almost aggressive warning right in the text of the report. The formatting itself literally screams at the reader.
Oh, yeah, the all-caps section.
Yes, it says, undue reflection on the past brings melancholy. Over-enchantment with the present brings excessive introspection. Focus on the future.
With 3 exclamation points.
It feels very raw.
Extremely raw. But, it makes me wonder, isn't this heavy emphasis on vision and looking to the future isn't it just 1980s corporate consulting speak filtering into religious organizations? Like, it sounds like a business seminar, not a ministry evaluation.
It absolutely is the language of management
Yeah.
consulting, and that is precisely why it was so necessary.
Yeah, because the religious and nonprofit sector at this time was just deeply insulated. These missions were historically built entirely on legacy.
Right. Doing things the way they've always been done.
Exactly. They revered the heroic stories of their founders from, the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So that melancholy for the past that he mentions, it's a very real organizational trap.
I can see that.
If an organization's entire identity is wrapped up in how things used to be done or the miracles of the founding days, they just become paralyzed.
Like it's like an amber?
Right. And conversely, if they're only looking at today's immediate crises that excessive introspection Olson warns about, they're just reacting to the daily triage. They're basically just treading water while the ocean rises all around them.
I look at it kind of like driving a car,
Yeah.
like looking too long in the rearview mirror, looking at the past, that's going to cause a crash because you're not seeing what's coming.
That's a great analogy.
But then staring at your own steering wheel, that means you're just paralyzed. You're not going anywhere at all.
Exactly. It's like they were running a mom-and-pop corner store.
Yeah.
For decades, they kept the receipts in a cigar box. They knew every single customer by name, and they made all their purchasing decisions based on gut feeling.
Which is lovely, but...
Right, it worked for a long time. But Olson is walking into the room and saying, look, the neighborhood has changed. You are now unwittingly running a regional supermarket chain.
Oh, wow.
And if you don't install a barcode scanner and an actual inventory management system today, you will go bankrupt tomorrow. They couldn't rely on the cigar box anymore.
That captures the mechanical shift perfectly. If you are a mom-and-pop store, looking at the past is charming. But if you're a regional supermarket, looking at the past is basically a dereliction of duty.
Exactly. Olson was telling them that the sheer volume of human need in these expanding urban centers required a systems-level approach.
But knowing you need to look at the future doesn't actually tell you how to do it.
No, it doesn't.
So to build that system, to stop acting like a disorganized corner store, they couldn't just look up at the future. They had to define exactly what kind of vehicle they were driving.
Which leads directly to their identity crisis.
Right. Section 2. Because when Olson forced them to actually define what they were doing, they realized their brand and their internal definitions were just a total mess.
Complete mess.
So the report insists that the IUGM, the International Union of Gospel Missions, absolutely must rewrite its mission statement.
They had to start from the ground up.
Yeah. And Olson leans on a June 1984 publication called the Christian Leadership Letter, which was published by World Vision, to outline 7 specific purposes of a mission statement.
World Vision was a big player, so that was a smart reference.
Very smart. And one of the main purposes that stood out to me from those 7 is that a mission statement places boundaries. It explicitly tells you what you will not do.
That is crucial.
So why was that so critical for rescue missions at this specific time in the 80s?
Because without boundaries, you get mission drift. And mission drift is fatal for nonprofits.
How so?
Well, in a rapidly expanding urban environment, the needs are infinite.
Right.
So a facility might start out as just a place offering a hot meal and a bed to transient men. But soon, someone shows up who is severely mentally ill.
And you want to help them.
Exactly. So the staff tries to help. Then a mother with 3 children fleeing domestic violence shows up. They try to help her too.
It snowballs.
It does. Before long, this small soup kitchen is unwittingly operating as an unlicensed psychiatric facility and a domestic violence shelter.
Oh, wow.
And they're doing it without the specialized funding, without the trained staff, or the legal framework to do either of those things safely.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It is. So a mission statement provides the vital institutional permission to say no. That is outside our primary intent.
Gives them the power to say no.
Yes. It defines the scope of operations so that resources aren't diluted to the point of total failure.
He also says the mission statement has to act as a business statement, describing the actual need in the world. And that it forms the ethos, the culture of the organization.
It builds the DNA.
Yeah. And to force this, Olson actually runs a workshop exercise right there in the document to dissect the organization's name. They break down International Union of Gospel Missions into 3 distinct columns just to see what the words actually mean.
It's a fascinating exercise.
It is. You have the geographical commitment column, Are we world, North American, United States, or just the 48 contiguous states?
Right. Defining the territory.
Then a functional commitment.
Yeah.
Are we a union, a society, an association, or a club? And finally, the market commitment. Are we gospel missions, rescue ministries, emergency caring, urban discipling? They are literally deconstructing their brand identity word by word.
And that deconstruction forces an operational reckoning.
How do you mean?
Well, let's look at the functional column, debating whether they are an association versus a union that isn't just semantics. No. The word union in 1984 carried really heavy labor organizing connotations, or it just sounded archaic, like a 19th century temperance union.
Oh, right, like a trade union.
Exactly. If they define themselves instead as an association, that legally and structurally implies a modern professional body, one that provides services, training, and credentialing to its members. The name absolutely must flow from the operational reality.
I see that, but I want to push back a little on the branding aspect of this.
Sure.
Because the report explicitly warns about brand recognition, pointing out that the term rescue mission might actually be losing its specific Christian significance to the general public.
Yes, the genericization issue.
Right. It compares rescue mission to Kleenex or Frigidaire or the Salvation Army, basically becoming this generic catch-all term for any place that hands out a bowl of soup, regardless of its underlying spiritual mission.
It's a real fear.
So what does this all mean? If the secular public just assumes a rescue mission is a generic civic charity, does changing an organization's name really fix that? I mean, it feels like spending weeks wordsmithing a new title is just slapping a fresh coat of paint on a rusting car rather than fixing the engine.
That is a very fair critique. And honestly, if it stops at just the name change, you are entirely correct. It's just a cosmetic fix.
Right.
But the secularization of charitable terms is a massive threat to fundraising and resource allocation for faith-based groups.
Oh, because of the money.
Always the money. If the public views a rescue mission as functionally identical to a secular, state-funded homeless shelter, they might direct their private donations elsewhere.
Because they assume the government is handling it.
Exactly. They assume the mission is receiving government grants, so they don't need private checks.
Yeah.
Olson's argument is that forcing the leadership to debate whether they are evangelistic versus disadvantaged caring forces them to clarify their unique value proposition.
It forces them to pick a lane.
Yes, if they decide they are an urban caring association, that dictates a completely different set of services and a very different public posture to donors than if they decide they are a world gospel union.
That makes total sense.
So the debate over the name is simply the vehicle to force a consensus on the actual operational model.
Which means they couldn't figure out their operational model until they actually understood exactly who they were serving.
Right.
They had to totally abandon their 19th century assumptions. And this is where the report takes a hard pivot from abstract mission statements into cold, hard, granular demographic data.
Yes, the data.
Which leads us directly to Section 3, the San Bernardino case study, which is just a massive turning point in the document.
It is a turning point because it addresses a deep cultural friction within the leadership itself.
The friction between faith and facts.
Exactly. These leaders were deeply spiritual people who relied heavily on faith, prayer, and historical precedent.
Yeah.
And Olson knows this. He acknowledges their spiritual heritage. He says, look, God often uses special visions or dreams to direct people, and he cites Abraham and the Apostle Paul.
So he validates their worldview first.
He validates them, yes.
Yes.
But then he introduces the mechanical shift. He says, at other times, God uses facts to direct us in the way we are to go.
Facts.
Facts. He brings up Nehemiah surveying the ruined walls of Jerusalem before rebuilding them.
Oh, that's a good biblical example.
It is. He brings up William Carey, the father of modern missions, who used actual demographic knowledge of unreached populations back in the 18th century.
Wow.
And he points to Ralph Winter, a contemporary missiologist of the time, doing the exact same thing with data.
So he's basically building a theological defense for spreadsheets.
That is exactly what he's doing. Olson is systematically building a theological framework that gives these leaders permission to use spreadsheets. He is arguing that ignoring data is not a sign of faith. It's a sign of negligence.
And the spreadsheet he drops on them is intense. Exhibit IA in the report breaks down the inner city of San Bernardino, California, using 1984 census data.
It's incredibly detailed.
It really is. Rather than just saying, There are a lot of poor people here. He gives them the exact numbers. The total population of the city was 128,200, but the inner city was 67,500.
Right.
Then he breaks it down by ethnicity. 29,800 Hispanic, 18,100 Black, 18,300 White, and 1,300 Asian. But what fascinated me is the age and family breakdown.
Yes, the family units.
He categorizes the data into unborn, under 5, youth 5-12, all the way up to singles over 18, couples with children, and elderly. So why was breaking it down to that level of granularity so revolutionary for these specific mission leaders?
Because it completely shattered their historical operational paradigm.
How so?
Well, for decades, the traditional rescue mission model was built almost entirely around serving transient, single, adult men.
The classic Skid Row demographic.
Exactly, the stereotypical Skid Row demographic. And the services were designed specifically for that. Large open dormitories, mass feeding programs, industrial work programs.
Right.
But when Olson puts a spreadsheet in front of them showing massive populations of youth 5-12 and couples with children living in the immediate vicinity of their buildings, it creates an absolute operational crisis.
Because you can't put a family in a men's dorm.
You cannot put a couple with 3 young children into a massive open dormitory with 100 transient men. It is unsafe and it is ineffective.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
The demographic data proved that the neighborhood had fundamentally changed, the nature of urban poverty had changed, and therefore the entire service delivery model of the mission had to change.
So they mapped those demographic segments against 10 different areas of need.
Yeah.
Food, shelter, clothing, medical, mental, family, education, jobs, justice, and Christian education.
A very comprehensive list.
Very. And through this analysis, the report identifies what it calls a tangled mass of problems ready to engulf the person or ministry brave enough to step into it.
Such a vivid phrase.
It's an intimidating picture. But Olson synthesizes all of this into a very specific conclusion about the root cause. He argues that nearly all these inner city problems relate back, like a web, to the values being taught in the family.
Right.
And that the collapse of the family structure is the single most critical problem.
Which is, I have to point out, a very characteristic 1980 sociological analysis.
Definitely. Very of its time.
Follow the logic chain Olson builds here. He argues the family relies on the church for strength, but people have cut their moorings.
They're adrift.
They are adrift, and the inner city churches themselves are described as being under siege.
Wow.
Because they are geographically located in the areas of highest need, but they are experiencing extreme capital flight.
Money left the city.
Exactly. Their congregations are shrinking, they're frustrated by limited resources, and they just lack the leadership and the financial bandwidth to build the necessary relationships to actually help the needy right outside their doors.
While at the exact same time, the wealth has moved. Olson points out that resources, money, volunteers, professional expertise are all sitting out in the suburban churches.
Out in a sprawl.
Yeah. The suburban churches want to help, but they are geographically isolated from the crisis. So you have this massive disconnect.
Yeah.
The inner city churches have the proximity but no resources, and the suburban churches have the resources but no proximity or expertise in poverty alleviation.
Exactly. And this is the strategic genius of the San Bernardino case study. Olson fundamentally repositions the identity of the rescue mission right here.
He gives them a new role.
Yes. He moves them away from the traditional nostalgic view of being a solitary lighthouse standing all alone in the darkness.
I love that lighthouse imagery, but it's isolated.
It is. So instead, he defines them as a strategic bridge.
A bridge.
Yes.
Okay.
The rescue missions have historical experience dealing with severe poverty. They are located directly in the inner city, and they have the institutional capacity to manage large-scale resources.
So they're the middlemen.
Essentially, yes. Olson is telling the IUGM, your new identity isn't just an independent soup kitchen. You are the network connector.
Wow.
You are the vital logistical link between suburban wealth and inner city collapse. You are the only entity equipped to actually channel those suburban resources effectively into the urban core.
But being a bridge on paper doesn't actually work unless the traffic decides to cross it, right?
Very true.
To convince the public, the donors, and those suburban churches that they were the right people for the job, these missions needed to prove they were relevant, competent, and trustworthy.
They needed to look the part.
Exactly. And that required a massive, sweeping upgrade in their public relations.
Section 4 dives into this PR pivot. The report notes that the absolute #1 felt need among the mission leaders interviewed was improving their public image.
They knew they had an image problem.
They did. They knew they looked outdated, and they were desperate for help with it.
We really have to analyze the socioeconomic context of the early 1980s to understand this desperation.
Right, what was happening politically. This is the era of Reaganomics. It's a period defined by significant shifts in federal policy regarding social safety nets, which resulted in substantial cuts to various government relief and welfare programs.
The safety net was shrinking.
Yes. And the report explicitly identifies this macro trend, noting that government is declining in support of relief work.
So Olson sees an opening.
He does. Olson is essentially a political pragmatist here.
Yeah.
He tells the missions to actively capitalize on this exact narrative. He hands them a specific, actionable PR theme to deploy nationwide. We're making up the gap.
We're making up the gap.
Yes. The core message they need to broadcast to the public is the government is stepping back from meeting the local crisis, so we, the private sector, are stepping in to catch the people falling through the cracks.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I want to spend some time on this because the implications are just huge.
They really are.
By leaning heavily into the PR narrative of the government is declining, we are making up the gap, is there a danger there? Like, does it inherently politicize a faith-based charity?
That's a great question.
If an organization starts pitching itself as the necessary alternative to the state, aren't they suddenly picking a side in a very heated, ongoing political debate about the fundamental role of government?
It is a very perilous tightrope to walk, and it touches on the core tension of the nonprofit sector in the 80s.
So how do they balance it?
Well, if we look at this strictly as a strategic PR maneuver within the context of 1984, the genius of the Making Up the Gap slogan is that it actually appeals to both sides of the political aisle.
Oh, really?
Albeit for entirely different reasons. For political conservatives, this narrative validates a core ideological belief that private, faith-based initiatives in local communities should be handling social welfare rather than a bloated federal state.
Right, so donating supports that ideology.
Exactly. Donating to the mission becomes a way to reinforce that worldview. Now, for political progressives, the narrative highlights the immediate, desperate human cost of government cuts.
Ah, I see.
They see the mission as an emergency triage unit, keeping people alive, and donating becomes an act of mitigating the damage of those federal policies.
So it's a highly effective fundraising lever because it plays to literally everyone's anxieties about the shifting economy.
Yes, it hits all the right buttons.
But does it compromise the organization's soul in the long run?
That is the long-term risk, absolutely. If an organization's identity becomes entirely reactive, meaning it's defined solely by what the government isn't doing, they risk losing their proactive foundational mission.
Right.
They stop being driven by their own theological imperatives and start being driven by the fluctuating gaps in the federal budget.
Which is super precarious. Like if the government suddenly reinstates a massive housing program, does the mission just lose its reason to exist?
Precisely. However, in 1984, facing an immediate crisis of relevance and funding, Olson saw this narrative simply as the most effective, immediate tool to gain public attention and unlock suburban funding.
And the tactical PR advice he gives them to execute this narrative is so incredibly specific to the era.
It's a real throwback.
It is. He tells them to host open houses, to show the community the facilities. He tells them to sponsor a walkathon or a jogathon, which, it was a massive fundraising craze in the 80s.
Everyone was doing jogathons.
Right. And he suggests hosting appreciation dinners for business suppliers, like the people selling them food in bulk or paper goods. And he insists these dinners must be held at comfortable, good hotels, not in the mission dining room.
Which is all about optics.
So totally. And then there's the media strategy. He tells them to mail out human interest stories of exactly about 600 words to local newspapers, accompanied by exactly 2 glossy black and white photos.
Yes.
Why the micromanagement on the photos and the word count, that feels so arbitrary to me.
It sounds arbitrary now, but in 1984, it was the exact mechanical requirement for newspaper syndication.
Oh, really?
Yes. Local newspapers operated on very strict spatial layouts. A 600-word story fits perfectly into a standard editorial column.
Ah, so it's plug and play.
Exactly. And providing exactly 2 high-quality, glossy, black and white photos gives the editor a layout option, a primary image, and an inset without overwhelming the photo desk.
And they had to be glossy.
Glossy photos reproduce much better in print than matte. Olson is basically teaching them how to remove all the friction for the media.
Make it easy for them to say yes.
Yes. If a mission sends a rambling 3-page letter and a blurry map Polaroid, it goes straight in the trash. But if they send a perfectly formatted 600-word piece with ready-to-print photos, an overworked local editor will just drop it right into the Sunday edition to fill space.
That is brilliant. It's basically PR Mechanics 101.
Exactly.
And the content of those 600 words was crucial. The report mentions a significant lesson learned from the famous Unshackled radio drama.
Oh, Unshackled was huge.
Yeah, for context, Unshackled was this massively successful long-running radio show produced by the Pacific Garden Mission in Chicago. And it dramatized real, gritty conversion stories of people who came to the mission.
Real human drama.
Yeah, and the lesson Olson draws from it is that public success comes from telling stories of changed lives, not just handing out statistics.
Precisely. The 600 words and the 2 glossy photos are merely the delivery mechanism. The payload has to be the human narrative.
The story.
Yes. Earlier in the report, Olson forced them to look at demographic spreadsheets to understand their internal operations. But here, he's reminding them you cannot fundraise with a spreadsheet.
No one writes a check for a pie chart.
Exactly. People do not donate to a demographic matrix. They donate to a compelling story of human redemption. The PR strategy requires balancing the cold, hard data needed for internal management with the deeply emotional narratives needed for external support.
But pitching this slick, professional, relevant image to the outside world creates a totally new problem.
It always does.
Because you can't just mail out perfect press releases and host appreciation dinners at nice hotels if your internal operations are a complete disaster.
Right, if they look behind the curtain.
Exactly. If a business leader comes to an open house and sees chaotic, disorganized management, the PR completely backfires. So this realization that they actually had to be professional on the inside sparked a massive and somewhat painful bureaucratic overhaul. Which brings us to Section 5.
The demand for professionalism. And it was a profound shock to the system for many of these leaders.
I bet.
The report does not mince words regarding the internal state of the missions. It defines professionalism not as a luxury, but as a voluntary commitment to achieve excellence and a necessary step to triumph over mediocrity.
Ouch.
Mediocrity. Yeah. Using the word mediocrity to describe the life's work of dedicated, spiritually motivated people definitely stings.
That's a gut punch.
But Olson used it intentionally. He was demanding a structural revolution. And one of the most significant disruptive structural shifts he proposed was changing how the IUGM itself operated as an entity.
How so?
He demanded moving the association from a model of institutional memberships to an association of individual memberships.
Okay, I want to make sure I understand the mechanics of that because it sounds like a minor administrative detail, but it clearly caused an absolute uproar.
It was a massive deal.
So under the old system, the building or the specific local organization held the membership, right? So like the Main Street Rescue Mission was the member of the IUGM, regardless of who actually worked there.
Correct. The institutional membership model made total sense in the early 20th century when mission directors often stayed at the exact same facility for their entire adult lives.
They were fixtures in the community.
Exactly. But by 1984, the nonprofit sector was becoming a professionalized career track. People were mobile. An executive director might run a mission in Seattle for 5 years, then get hired to turn around a larger mission in Atlanta.
Right.
Under the institutional model, the individual leader had no portable credentials. They had no personal professional standing within the association.
Oh, I see.
Olson argued that to be a true professional body, like the American Medical Association or the American Bar Association, the membership must adhere to the individual.
So the person is the member, and they carry that credential with them wherever they go.
Yes.
The report actually lays out the new dues structure. $125 for a first member from a rescue ministry, and $60 for specialized track memberships, which allowed subordinate staff like, the director of facilities management or the volunteer coordinator to join and get specialized training.
Expanding the professional net.
Yeah, but enforcing this new professional standard did not go over well with the rank and file. Not at all.
The Huntsville Mutiny?
Yes. The report includes this brutally honest, verbatim feedback from the May 1984 IUGM convention held in Huntsville. The attendees were incredibly vocal about their frustration.
The Huntsville feedback is just a masterclass in reading organizational friction. Like, what were the attendees actually saying beneath the complaints?
Well, they were complaining about everything that felt corporate. They complained about hidden costs in attending the convention.
Which is classic complaint.
Totally.
Yeah.
They complained there was too much boring business being discussed on the floor and not enough practical workshops.
Right.
And the most stinging critique, which I think perfectly encapsulates this whole culture clash, was from an attendee who questioned why an evangelist was brought in as the keynote speaker.
This is the best part.
The attendee essentially said, look, everyone in this room is already a born-again believer. We don't need a revival 10 sermon trying to save our souls. We need a Bible teacher or practical training on how to actually do our jobs.
That specific piece of feedback is the sound of an organization's constituency completely outgrowing its traditional structure.
They're over it.
They really were. For decades, the annual convention was essentially a spiritual retreat. It was a camp meeting where isolated mission directors gathered to be encouraged, sing hymns, and listen to evangelists.
A fellowship event.
Yes. But the 1984 attendee is essentially saying, look, I am managing a multi-million-dollar budget, I'm navigating complex city zoning laws, and I'm dealing with severe psychological trauma in my facility. I don't need a camp meeting, I need an industry conference.
And Olson heard that. He took that raw feedback and translated it into a strict modernization roadmap.
He laid it all out.
He told the leadership they had to integrate with the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, the ECFA,
to establish rigorous, uniform, ethical, and technical standards for fundraising.
Right. And he suggested changing the top leadership title from the archaic, clerical-sounding executive secretary to the modern corporate title of executive director.
Updating the optics again.
Yeah. He told the national office leadership they needed to join the American Society of Association Executives, the ASAE, so they could actually learn the legal and administrative mechanics of running a professional association.
He was literally forcing them to learn the trade of association management, which is an entirely different skill set from the trade of running a local homeless shelter.
Very different.
And perhaps the most telling detail of this whole modernization push is the technology recommendation.
Oh, yes. The computer. He actually had to formally justify the purchase of a computer.
It's amazing to read now.
He writes into the report that the national office needed a computer for name and address maintenance. And he justifies it by stating that the cost of computers is decreasing at such a rapid rate that the cost justification is already existent.
Such formal language for buying a PC.
Right. It really grounds you in the technological reality of 1984. They are attempting to manage a massive international network of complex facilities using metal filing cabinets, Rolodexes, and typewriters.
And they were drowning in paper and complexity.
I can't even imagine.
The urgency for this technological and professional upgrade is underscored by a 1983 self-study referenced in the report. The data showed that these missions were rapidly expanding into completely new operational frontiers.
Like what?
Well, 77% of the missions had started entirely new outreach programs in just the past 5 years. As we discussed earlier, they were moving far beyond just providing beds for transient men.
The demographics had shifted.
Right. They were opening women and children's shelters, they were managing jail and parolee reintegration programs, and attempting complex mental health interventions.
That's a lot to take on.
It is. And the local directors were entirely out of their depth. The self-study showed that nearly 60% of directors desperately wanted how-to articles from peers who had actually successfully operated these specific programs.
They needed a playbook.
Exactly. They wanted correspondence courses. They needed the IUGM to function as a professional training hub, not just a fellowship club.
But enforcing this slick, professional, data-driven, urban-focused model, it uncovered a really deep underlying friction among the members of the IUGM.
It ripped the Band-Aid off.
It did. And this brings us to Section 6, which contains perhaps the most brilliant diagnostic insight in the entire 1984 report. This modernization push was tearing at the fabric of the missions, but Olson recognized that it wasn't a clash of theology. It was a clash of culture.
Yes. This is where the report reaches its absolute analytical peak.
I agree.
Olson brings in a framework from Frank R. Tillapaw's book, The Church Unleashed. He uses Tillapaw's sociological models to explain the fundamental conflict dividing the leadership of the rescue missions.
Rural versus urban divide.
Exactly. It was the rural and small city mindset colliding head-on with the urban and large city mindset. Tillapaw basically argues that the size and density of the city you operate in isn't just a geographic fact. It literally forms a deeply ingrained psychological and operational operating system.
And the chart in the report contrasting these two mindsets is just eye-opening. Let's break down the values. The rural or small city mindset values the status quo, sameness, harmony, smallness, being established, and probably. being separate from the surrounding culture.
Very protective values.
Yeah. And on the exact opposite side, the urban or large city mindset values change, diversity, conflict management, bigness, being mobile, and being among the people.
Yeah.
These are diametrically opposed ways of interacting with reality.
They really are. And what is so crucial here is how the report diagnoses the fallout of this cultural collision.
What was happening?
Mission leaders were routinely mistaking this deeply sociological conflict for a spiritual or theological one. Think about how those values actually manifest in behavior. A leader from a small town values harmony and the status quo. They look at a massive, dynamic, chaotic urban mission that actively embraces change, diversity, and constant conflict management.
And they think it's bad.
Right. The rural leader interprets that chaos as being worldly or corporate or unspiritual. They feel the urban mission has lost its reliance on God and replaced it with management theory.
I can see how they'd jump to that conclusion.
But conversely, the urban leader, who is literally drowning in the complex needs of a megacity, looks at the rural mission prioritizing smallness and harmony and labels them as stagnant, ineffective, or willfully ignoring the crisis.
So they're just pointing fingers at each other.
Exactly. They both thought they were fighting a theological war over the soul of the organization, when really they just had fundamentally incompatible sociological operating systems.
I picture it kind of like two people sitting down to play a board game. One person firmly believes they are playing chess, and the other person is absolutely certain they are playing checkers. They are both looking at the exact same black and red board. They're both moving pieces around, but they are operating under entirely different rule sets.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So when the chess player moves a knight in an L shape, jumping over other pieces, the checkers player just flips the table and says, "You're cheating, you're breaking the rules, you're ruining the game."
Because in their mind, you are.
Right. It causes massive frustration. Not because either person is malicious, but because they haven't agreed on the underlying mechanics of reality. Small-town values like sameness and harmony actively sabotage an urban reality that requires diversity and conflict management just to keep the doors open.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize the structural friction. If your operating system demands harmony, you will naturally avoid addressing the systemic issues of a massive urban center because those issues inherently cause conflict.
You can't have both.
No. And the tension within the IUGM was so severe over this that Olson actually tentatively suggests a radical structural solution.
What did he suggest?
He says, although it isn't his primary recommendation, the divide is so deep that it might actually be warranted to create two entirely separate associations.
Just split the whole thing in half.
Yeah, or at least create two entirely separate administrative training tracks and newsletter contents just to accommodate these two wildly different mindsets. You can't train the checkers player and the chess player in the exact same seminar.
But he doesn't want to split the organization if he can avoid it, right?
No, he views that as a last resort.
He ultimately grounds his conclusion in a plea for unity, returning to the spiritual foundation they all share. He goes to the book of Ephesians, chapter 4, where the Apostle Paul calls for the unity of the Spirit.
A very pastoral move.
It is. He begs the members of the board and the wider association to resist a critical spirit, to recognize that the differences driving them crazy are cultural, not theological, and to basically become encouragers of one another as they navigate this massive transition.
It was a vital pastoral note to end a deeply analytical bureaucratic report on.
It grounds the whole thing.
It does. He had spent pages tearing down their old structures, exposing their inefficiencies, and forcing them to look at intimidating data. By ending on Ephesians 4, he is reminding them that the ultimate goal of all this painful professionalization is not just corporate efficiency. It is to better fulfill their core spiritual mandate to actually care for the vulnerable.
It's an incredible arc. We've watched this 1984 report take an organization on a massive, uncomfortable journey.
A total paradigm shift.
Yeah. It starts by forcing them to look at the explosive demographic growth of global cities and predicting the rise of megacities. It tells them to stop relying just on mystical dreams of the past and start looking at granular census data.
Confronting the facts.
Exactly. Confronting the shifting realities of urban poverty, like that web of problems in San Bernardino. It pushes them to upgrade their public relations, teaching them to fill the gap left by changing government policies, complete with walkathons and the precise mechanics of newspaper syndication.
The 600 words.
The 600 words and 2 glossy photos.
Yeah.
And then it demands they buy computers, join professional associations, restructure their memberships, and rewrite their mission statements to prevent operational drift. And finally, it forces them to navigate the painful psychological friction between their rural, traditional roots and the unforgiving demands of their urban future.
And if we step back from the specifics of 1984, the relevance for you, the listener, is profound.
Oh, it applies to so much more.
It really does. This
Yeah.
isn't just a history lesson about rescue missions. Anytime you are part of a growing organization, whether it's a tech startup, a local community group, or a massive nonprofit, you will eventually hit this exact same wall.
The wall of scale.
Yes. You will reach a scale where the initial passion, the heroic founding legacy, and all the good intentions are simply no longer enough to sustain the operation.
You outgrow the cigar box.
To survive, you have to embrace uncomfortable structural changes. You have to rely on hard, cold data, even when it totally contradicts your gut feeling. And most difficult of all, you have to navigate the painful cultural shifts between the people who long for the harmony of the good old days and the people who recognize the complex demands of the future.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. We've seen how absolutely necessary it was for this grassroots, spiritually driven movement to become a highly structured, data-driven professional organization in order to survive the urbanization of the late 20th century. But what happens to the soul of an organization when it makes that leap? Does it gain the structural efficiency needed to save the city, but at the cost of its original radical spark? Or is professionalizing compassion the only real way to scale it in an increasingly complex world?